Picture this. You're 7 years old, walking through a carnival house of mirrors. Each reflection shows you something different, taller, shorter, wider, distorted in ways that make you laugh or cringe. But here's the thing that haunts me about that memory. Even as a child, you instinctively knew which reflections were lies. Yet somehow, as we grow older, we lose that instinct. We begin collecting mirrors, not the glass kind, but the human kind. Every person we meet becomes another surface that reflects back an image of who we might be. And slowly, desperately, we start believing these reflections are more real than the person standing in front of them. Today, I want to tell you about the most dangerous addiction of our time. It's not two substances or screens, though those are symptoms. It's our addiction to being seen, understood, and validated by others. It's the belief that we only exist when someone else confirms our existence. This is the story of how we became prisoners in our own house of mirrors, and more importantly, how we can find our way out. 1. The weight of eyes. There's a Japanese concept called hito no mi, literally people's eyes. It describes the invisible weight of being watched, judged, evaluated by others. In traditional Japanese culture, this awareness was meant to encourage moral behavior. But somewhere along the way, we've turned this natural social instinct into a prison. I remember watching my nephew take his first steps. He was so focused on the simple act of moving forward that he didn't even notice the room full of adults cheering him on. He fell, got up, fell again. No embarrassment, no performance anxiety, just pure, concentrated effort toward his goal. When did we lose that? When did we start walking not because we wanted to move forward, but because we wanted others to see us walk? The answer lies in a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be human. We've confused being social creatures with being validation-seeking creatures. We've mistaken the natural desire for connection with an insatiable hunger for approval. Think about the last time you posted something on social media. Be honest, were you sharing something meaningful, or were you fishing? Were you expressing your authentic self? Or were you crafting a version of yourself that you hoped others would like? There's no shame in this recognition. We've all done it. We've all felt that small dopamine hit when someone likes our post, and that tiny sting when our carefully crafted content is met with silence. But here's what we don't realize. Every time we post for validation, every time we speak to be liked rather than to be truthful, we're practicing being someone else, or rehearsing a performance of ourselves, rather than living as ourselves. 2. The economics of approval. Let me tell you about Maria, a brilliant architect I know. She spent years designing buildings that pleased her clients, won awards, and earned her recognition in her field. She was successful by every external measure. Yet she came to me one day exhausted, saying, "I don't recognize my own work anymore. I don't know what I actually like." Maria had unknowingly entered into what I call the economics of approval. She had started treating her authentic preferences as currencies, something to be spent in exchange for recognition, awards, and professional advancement. This is the trap of validation seeking. We begin to see our genuine selves as a resource to be managed, rather than a truth to be lived. We calculate how much authenticity we can afford to show. We budget our realness like it is a finite commodity that might run out if we are too generous with it. But authenticity doesn't work like money. It doesn't diminish when you spend it, it grows. The more genuinely you show up in the world, the more genuine you become. The more you practice being yourself, the more self you have to be. The tragedy is that most people never discover this because they're too busy trying to be what others want them to be. Consider the paradox. The people we most admire are often those who seem least concerned with being admired. Think of your personal heroes, artists, leaders, thinkers who changed the world. What draws us to them isn't their desperate need for approval, but their apparent indifference to it. We're attracted to authenticity like plants to sunlight. Yet we spend our lives trying to manufacture artificial versions of what we could simply be. 3. The performance trap. There's an old theater term called breaking character. It's when an actor accidentally steps out of their role and reveals the real person underneath. In theater, this is considered a mistake. In life, it might be the most important thing we ever do. But most of us are so deep in character that we've forgotten we're acting. I think of James, a CEO, who built his entire leadership style around what he thought powerful people should sound like. He lowered his voice in meetings, used phrases he'd heard in movies, adopted mannerisms he'd seen in other executives. He was successful, but he was exhausted. Every interaction required him to remember who he was supposed to be. The weight of constant performance is enormous. When you're always acting, you never get to rest. When you're always calculating how to be received, you never get to simply be. And here's the cruelest irony. The very performances we create to gain acceptance often prevent genuine connection. People might like our performances, but they can't truly connect with them. They're responding to our masks, not our faces. Think about your closest relationships. I guarantee they weren't built on your best performances, but on your most honest moments. The times you forgot to manage how you came across. The times you were too tired to pretend, too moved to calculate, too real to edit. Genuine connection happens when two people stop performing for each other and start being with each other. For the quiet revolution. Now, I want to share something that might sound radical. The most revolutionary act you can commit in our attention economy, the world, is to stop caring whether people like you. Not to become cruel or callous, but to become genuinely indifferent to approval and disapproval alike. To develop what the Stoics called inner scorecard, a way of measuring your worth that doesn't depend on external validation. This isn't about becoming a hermit or rejecting human connection. It's about changing the fundamental equation of how you relate to others. Instead of asking, how can I get them to like me? You start asking, how can I be most useful to this situation? Instead of what do they want to hear, you ask what needs to be said. I learned this lesson from my grandfather, a man who seemed to possess an almost supernatural calm. He would speak his mind clearly and kindly, then seem genuinely unbothered by how his words were received. I once asked him how he did it. He told me, when I was young, I thought my job was to make people comfortable with me. Now I realize my job is to be comfortable with myself. If others are comfortable too, that's nice. If not, that's also fine. This shift from trying to be comfortable to others to being comfortable with yourself is perhaps the most profound transformation a person can make. Chapter 5. The Courage of Solitude. There's a difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the pain of being alone. Solitude is the glory of being alone. Most people are terrified of solitude because they've never met themselves without an audience. They don't know who they are when no one is watching. They've spent so long performing that they've forgotten what exists underneath the performance. But solitude is where you discover your authentic voice. Not the voice that adjusts its tone based on who's listening, but the voice that speaks your truth, whether anyone is there to hear it or not. I challenge you to spend time alone with yourself without any external stimulation. No music, no podcasts, no books. Just you and your thoughts. Notice what comes up. Notice what you think about when you're not thinking about what others think about. This isn't easy. In our hyper-connected world, we've lost the art of being alone. We fill every moment with input, stimulation, distraction. We carry devices that ensure we never have to be truly alone with our thoughts. But in that aloneness, in that silence, something profound happens. You begin to hear your authentic voice, not the voice that wants to be liked, but the voice that wants to be true. 6. The paradox of influence. Here's something fascinating. The people who care least about influencing others often influence them most. The people who aren't trying to persuade often prove most persuasive. Why? Because authenticity is magnetic. When someone stands in their truth without apology, without performance, without need for approval, something in us recognizes it and is drawn to it. Let me tell you about my professor, Dr. Elizabeth Chen. She was a philosophy teacher who never raised her voice, never tried to dazzle us with complex theories, never seemed to care whether we agreed with her or not. She would simply present an idea, explore it honestly, and then sit quietly while we grappled with it. Her classes were packed, not because she entertained us, but because something about her presence made us want to think more deeply. She had what I now recognize as gravitational authenticity. Didn't pull people toward her. They were naturally drawn to the space she created by being genuinely herself. I remember one day a student challenged her on a point about Sartre. Instead of defending her position or getting flustered, she paused, really considered what he'd said, and then responded. I think you might be right. I hadn't thought about it from that angle. The respect in that room deepened instantly. Here was someone so secure in herself that she could admit uncertainty, so authentic that she could change her mind in public. Think about the leaders who've most influenced your life. I bet they weren't the ones who tried hardest to convince you of their worth. They were the ones who were simply, undeniably themselves. They influenced through being, not through trying. This is the paradox of influence. The moment you stop trying to influence others is often the moment you become truly influential. The moment you stop performing for approval is often when you become most worthy of approval. Consider the difference between charisma and presence. Charisma often involves performance, its magnetic personality turned outward, designed to attract. Presence is different. Presence is the quality of being so completely yourself that others feel permission to be themselves around you. Charisma might win you followers. Presence creates other leaders. But this is crucial, you can't fake this. You can't strategically decide to stop seeking validation as a way to get more validation. The universe has a way of detecting that kind of manipulation. Authenticity can't be performed, it can only be lived. I've watched people try to fake it till they make it with authenticity, and it's painful to witness. True authenticity requires something deeper than strategy. It requires surrender. Surrender of the need to control how you're perceived. Surrender of the fantasy that you can manage everyone's opinion of you. 7. The art of disappointing others. Let me teach you a skill they do on offer in school. The art of disappointing others gracefully. This might sound harsh, but it's one of the most loving things you can learn to do. Because when you're willing to disappoint others in service of your truth, you give them permission to do the same. I learned this lesson the hard way through my friend Sarah, who spent years saying yes to every social invitation, every favor, every request. She was universally liked, but privately miserable. She was drowning in other people's priorities. Sarah's turning point came at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday when she found herself baking cupcakes for her neighbor's daughter's last-minute school event. As she stood there, exhausted and resentful, measuring flour she didn't have energy to measure, she realized she had become a prisoner of her own agreeableness. The next day, Sarah called me. "I need to learn how to say no," she said. "But I don't know how to do it without hurting people." We spent hours talking about what it means to disappoint others consciously, rather than unconsciously. Because here's the truth Sarah had missed. By always saying yes, she was actually disappointing people all the time. She was showing up to commitments exhausted, resentful, and half-present. She was giving people her depleted energy instead of her authentic engagement. When Sarah started saying no kindly but firmly, something magical happened. Some people were disappointed. Some friendships shifted. A few people even got angry. But the relationships that remained became deeper, more genuine. People started coming to her not because she always said yes, but because when she did say yes, they knew she meant it. But learning to disappoint others gracefully is an art form. It's not about becoming selfish or cruel. It's about becoming honest about your capacity and your priorities. The first step is recognizing that disappointing others is inevitable. You can't be everything to everyone without becoming nothing to yourself. The question isn't whether you'll disappoint people, it's whether you'll do it consciously or unconsciously, with integrity or with resentment. When you disappoint someone consciously, you can do it with kindness. You can acknowledge their disappointment without taking responsibility for fixing it. You can maintain your boundary while still caring about them as a person. I think of my grandmother, who had mastered this art. When people asked her to do things she couldn't or wouldn't do, she had a way of saying no that somehow left people feeling respected rather than rejected. She would say something like, "I can see how important this is to you, and I'm not the right person to help with this particular thing." No elaborate excuses, no false promises, just simple, kind honesty. The deeper truth about disappointing others is that it forces them to develop their own resources. When you stop rescuing people from their discomfort, they learn to manage it themselves. When you stop being available for everything, they learn to solve problems without you. This isn't abandonment, it's development. There's also something profound that happens when you become comfortable with others' disappointment in you. You stop managing their emotions, and you start honoring your own. You stop living in constant fear of letting people down. You start living with the confidence that comes from knowing your own limits. When you don't want to do something, say so respectfully. When you disagree, express your disagreement thoughtfully. You'll be amazed at what happens during this week. Some people will respond negatively, and that's information. Others will respond with relief. Finally, someone is being real with them. You'll discover that most people are starving for authentic interaction. Another powerful practice is learning to sit with discomfort, without immediately trying to fix it through others' approval. When you feel awkward in a social situation, instead of rushing to fill the silence with pleasing words, try just sitting with the awkwardness. When someone seems disappointed in you, instead of immediately trying to make them feel better, try simply acknowledging their disappointment, without taking responsibility for fixing it. Here's a practice that changed my life. Every day, do one thing that scares your approval-seeking self. Express an unpopular opinion respectfully, or something you love, but think others might find strange. Share a piece of creative work before you think it's perfect. Ask for what you need instead of hoping someone will guess. The goal isn't to become contrarian or difficult. The goal is to strengthen your capacity to act from your authentic center, regardless of how others might respond. Start a truth journal where you write down your real thoughts and feelings about situations without censoring yourself. Don't worry about being fair or balanced or seeing all sides. Just be honest about your actual experience. This practice helps you distinguish between your authentic voice and your diplomatic voice. Practice receiving compliments and criticism with equal neutrality. When someone praises you, notice your impulse to either dismiss it or cling to it. When someone criticizes you, notice your impulse to either defend or collapse. Instead, try simply saying thank you for sharing your perspective to both. Learn to make decisions from your gut rather than from your head. Your gut knows what's authentic for you. Your head knows what's strategic. Start asking yourself not what's the smart thing to do, but what feels right to do. Your intuition is often more authentic than your analysis. Most importantly, be patient with yourself. Authenticity isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a practice you develop. You don't suddenly become authentic one day and stay that way forever. You practice authenticity in each moment, each interaction, each choice. Some days you'll be more successful than others, and that's perfectly normal. Chapter 13. The shadow side of authenticity. Before we continue, I need to address something important. The shadow side of authenticity. Because like any powerful concept, authenticity can be misunderstood and misused. I've met people who use being authentic as an excuse to be cruel. They say hurtful things and then defend themselves with, "I'm just being honest," or "this is who I am." But cruelty isn't authenticity. It's often a performance of toughness designed to protect a fragile ego. True authenticity includes kindness, not because kindness is always easy, but because most authentic people discover that underneath their defensive layers, they're actually quite caring. The desire to hurt others usually comes from our own hurt, not from our authentic center. I remember working with David, a manager who prided himself on radical honesty. He would deliver harsh feedback to his team members without consideration for timing, context, or their emotional state. When people complained, he would say, "I'm not going to fake being nice. This is who I am." But as we worked together, David began to recognize that his harshness was unauthentic. It was a learned behavior from growing up in a family where emotional expression was seen as weakness. His real authentic self was actually quite sensitive and empathetic. The cruelty was armor, not authenticity. Real authenticity requires emotional intelligence. It means being honest about your feelings and needs while also considering the impact of your words on others. It means expressing truth in ways that serve the situation, rather than just venting your emotions. Another shadow of authenticity is what I call authenticity as rebellion. Some people, especially those recovering from people-pleasing, swing too far in the opposite direction. They become deliberately contrary, sharing every thought and feeling without discretion, rejecting any consideration of others' needs as people-pleasing. But authentic living isn't about sharing everything you think and feel. It's about sharing what serves truth and connection. Sometimes authentic love looks like keeping certain thoughts to yourself, not because you're being fake, but because you're being wise. There is also the trap of authenticity performance, using your authentic self as a new identity to maintain. I've watched people become so attached to being seen as authentic that they start performing their authenticity, carefully curating which aspects of themselves to reveal to maintain their authentic image. The moment you're trying to prove your authenticity, you've lost it. True authenticity is unconscious. It's simply being yourself without thinking about being yourself. Another common misunderstanding is that authenticity means never changing or adapting. But humans are naturally adaptive creatures. Being authentic doesn't mean being rigid. It means adapting from a place of conscious choice rather than unconscious reaction. For example, I speak differently to my 5-year-old niece than I do to my graduate students. Both are authentic expressions of myself. I'm adapting my communication style to serve the relationship and the situation. The difference is that I'm choosing these adaptations consciously, not automatically morphing into whatever I think each person wants me to be. Finally, there rests the shadow of spiritual bypassing through authenticity, using the concept of being authentic to avoid growth or responsibility. I've heard people say, "This is just how I am," to justify behaviors that cause harm to themselves or others, as if authenticity means never having to develop or mature. But authentic growth is part of authentic living. If your authentic self includes patterns that cause suffering. Part of being authentic is honestly confronting those patterns and choosing to evolve. Authenticity isn't a fixed state. It's a dynamic process of becoming more genuinely yourself over time. Building an authentic life is playing the long game. In the short term, seeking validation might seem easier. People-pleasing might appear more efficient. Performance might feel safer. But over time, the weight of inauthenticity becomes unbearable. The energy it takes to constantly monitor and adjust yourself depletes your life force. The distance between who you are and who you pretend to be becomes a chasm that swallows your joy. Living authentically is harder at first, but easier in the long run. It requires courage up front, but delivers peace over time. It might cost you some relationships, but the ones that remain will be infinitely deeper. Think of it as compound interest for the soul. Every act of authenticity builds on the last. Every time you choose truth over approval, you strengthen your capacity for truth. Every time you honor your authentic response, you become more authentically responsive. The person you become through this practice, someone who knows their own mind, trusts their own judgment, and acts from their own center, that person doesn't just live a better life. They make life better for others simply by existing authentically in the world. Chapter 12. The Seasons of Authenticity. Authentic living isn't a straight line from performance to genuineness. It's more like seasons, periods of growth, harvest, rest, and renewal. Understanding these natural cycles can help you be more patient with your own journey. The spring of awakening. This is where most people begin the moment you realize you've been performing your life rather than living it. It's exciting and scary. You start experimenting with small acts of authenticity. You begin to notice the gap between who you are and who you've been pretending to be. In this season, everything feels possible. You might swing between extremes, being overly accommodating one day and rigidly authentic the next. This is normal. You're learning to calibrate. Be patient with yourself during this phase. You're planting seeds that will grow over time. I remember my own spring of awakening in graduate school. I had spent my undergraduate years trying to be the perfect student, agreeing with professors, writing papers that reflected what I thought they wanted to hear rather than what I actually thought. Then I took a philosophy class where the professor explicitly asked us to disagree with him, to find flaws in the arguments we were studying. For the first time, I felt permission to think my own thoughts. I started writing papers that reflected my genuine questions and concerns rather than just regurgitating acceptable ideas. The relief was profound, like I had been holding my breath for years and could finally exhale. The summer of growth. This is when you start to find your authentic voice and use it more consistently. You've developed some skill at being yourself, and you're seeing positive results. Relationships are becoming more genuine. You're making decisions that align with your values. You feel more energetic because you're not spending so much energy on performance. But summer also brings challenges. Not everyone will appreciate your authentic self. Some people who were comfortable with your performed self may resist your evolution. This is when you learn that authenticity sometimes requires letting go of relationships that were based on who you were pretending to be. During my summer of growth, I lost several friendships that had been built on shared complaints and cynicism. As I became more genuinely optimistic and interested in growth, these relationships no longer worked. It was painful, but it created space for friendships based on who I actually was, rather than who I had been pretending to be. The autumn of integration. This is the harvest season of authenticity. You've learned to be genuine without being harsh, honest without being cruel, authentic without being selfish. You've developed the emotional intelligence to express your truth in ways that serve relationships and situations. In autumn, authenticity becomes more natural and less effortful. You're not constantly monitoring whether you're being real or fake. You're simply being yourself. You've learned to navigate the social world as your authentic self, rather than as a performance. This is also the season when you start to see the deeper fruits of your authentic living. The relationships in your life are more satisfying. Your work feels more aligned with who you are. You have a clearer sense of your values and priorities, the winter of wisdom. This is the season of deep authenticity, when being genuine becomes so natural that you rarely think about it. You've integrated authenticity into your way of being in the world. You no longer struggle with the question of whether to be real or to perform. Authenticity has become your default setting. Winter is also the season of generous authenticity. You've learned to be yourself in ways that serve others. Your genuineness creates space for other people to be authentic. You become a kind of authenticity catalyst, someone whose presence makes it safer for others to be real. In winter, you'll also develop what I call authenticity wisdom, the ability to discern when and how to share your truth in ways that serve the highest good. You understand that being authentic doesn't mean sharing every thought and feeling, but rather sharing what serves love and truth in each situation. The spiral nature of growth. These seasons don't happen once, and then you're done. They spiral through your life at different levels. You might experience spring awakening in your career, while simultaneously being in the autumn of integration in your personal relationships. You might go through a winter of wisdom in one area of your life, then face a new spring awakening when you encounter a different challenge. Understanding this seasonal nature of authenticity can help you be more compassionate with yourself during difficult periods. If you're in a spring of awakening, expect things to feel messy and experimental. If you're in winter, appreciate the wisdom you've gained while remaining open to new growth. The key is to trust the process. Each season serves a purpose in your development as an authentic person. The excitement of spring, the challenges of summer, the harvest of autumn, the wisdom of winter all are necessary parts of the journey toward living as your genuine self. As we near the end of this journey together, I want to offer you an invitation. Not a command or a prescription, but a gentle invitation to experiment with what we've explored. What would it feel like to go through one day without checking how your words land? To speak from your truth rather than from your strategy? To make choices based on your genuine preferences rather than on what you think will be appreciated? What would it be like to sit with someone in their discomfort without trying to fix it or make them feel better? To let your own discomfort exist without immediately trying to escape it through others' approval? What would happen if you allowed yourself to be misunderstood? If you trusted that the right people would understand you and that the wrong people's misunderstanding couldn't harm the truth of who you are? This isn't about becoming selfish or inconsiderate. It's about becoming so genuinely yourself that your natural kindness flows from authenticity rather than from a desire to be liked. It's about discovering what generosity looks like when it comes from fullness rather than emptiness. Closing. The end of performance, I want to leave you with one final thought. There will come a moment in your life, maybe today, maybe years from now, when you realize you're tired of performing, tired of calculating how to be received, tired of the exhausting work of being anyone other than who you actually are. When that moment comes, remember this conversation. Remember that authenticity is always available to you. It's not something you have to earn or achieve. It's something you simply have to stop covering up. You don't need anyone's permission to be yourself. You don't need to wait until you re-perfect, or until the conditions are right, or until you re-sure everyone will approve. You can start right now, in this moment, by simply allowing yourself to be exactly who you are. By releasing the performance and settling into the truth. The world needs your authentic voice, not your carefully crafted impression of what you think it wants to hear. Your real laughter, not your diplomatic smile. Your genuine questions, not your safe conversations. You're enough exactly as you are, not because I say so, not because anyone says so, but because it's simply true. Your worth is not up for debate, not dependent on approval, not contingent on performance. You are here. You exist. That alone is enough. The mirror has always shown you the truth. It's time to start believing what you see. Take a deep breath. Feel your own presence. Notice that you exist right now, in this moment, without having to prove anything to anyone. This is where your power lives. This is where your freedom begins. This is who you've always been, underneath all the performance. Welcome home.